Hello, Harda. Ní fedlam si bheith eiscin, so ní lisa gom bhfuil aine ann nach bhfuil. Fáiltaí chealaigh roimh ar fad go dtí an sesiún seo de chuairt in éile Filíochta. Taobhlam an seo tá an talamh Jeff Holdridge, Olav le Béarla, Fila in Ollscoil Wake Forest, Carolina, agus stúrathóir Wake Forest University Press a chur an leabhar seo i gló. Taobh tá Ola Majecca de Dumni, Fila, Cruthathóir, Scríbhneoir, Iriseoir, agus duine a bheith inar measc a léamh in nómh. Agus taobh léithí tá Alan Titley. An talamh Alan Titley, an túdar, an tuairscéalaí, an drámadór, an gairscéalaí, an fila, an tiriseoir, an intellectóir, an corcaíoch. Cad eile is féidir a rá faoi, bhiste libh búlabos a thabhairt an trúlacha. So sé an legan amach a bheith an óchád ná go bhfuil Jeff chun cúpla focail rá, agus an son léigh Alan agus Ola roinnt dáanta ón leabhar agus míonóigh siad camahéamh cén fágur ránach siad na dáanta áirithe sin. So you're all very, very welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be part of court. To my left is Professor Jeff Holdridge, Professor of English at Wake Forest University. He is also the director of Wake Forest University Press, which has published this book. And he is going to say a few words to us about the venture and the project.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. People often ask, why is there an Irish publisher in North Carolina? And it's funny in a way because you would assume it would be in Philadelphia or in South Bend or Chicago or New York, but it was because my predecessor nearly 50 years ago decided he couldn't get a hold of Derek Mahan and Carson and other poets as easily as he wanted to, and so therefore started a press with that in mind, making it easier for other North Americans to get hold of these great books. And we've tried to remain true to that. The idea behind this book was one. I studied at UCD in the Anglo-Irish department when it was still called the Anglo-Irish department, and there was this sense of a tension between the Irish, obviously, and the Anglo-Irish. You know, what name was the proper name? Because Anglo-Irish was a Protestant on a horse, as Brendan Behan said, and so therefore. As we read the books in English, by, say, people like Mariah Edgeworth or Lady Morgan or William Allingham, there's always a character who comes from the Gaelic order and is a sort of fragment of a civilization that is seems to be, according to the authors, being eclipsed. But there's always something particularly romantic about someone like Count O'Halloran in The Absentee, or the O'Hara in Allingham's Lawrence Bloomfield in Ireland, or the Prince of Innismore, obviously, or Glorvina in the Wild Irish Girl, that in some ways I think echoes through the book. And the books are haunted by these presences, I think, undoubtedly. And I always was interested in that, though I don't have Irish, and I was too old when I started all this to really learn it, or not linguistic enough. But I was very interested in doing it. I was very interested in reading it, and of course I read Kinsel's book, the Poems of the Dispossessed and other things like that. And so therefore, what I decided I thought really needed to be done was to have a book that would really represent the tradition of poetry in the Irish language. And I met Brian. We met at a conference in Paris when I was teaching at the school there, and for Notre Dame. And I turned to him and I said, this is something I've always wanted to do, because for me, if I could have access to the tradition, even if it's only through the English language translation, and sometimes I think because the people who translate in Ireland know Irish, it's as much a conversation as it is a translation. That's the way it strikes me. And I was thinking about that this morning, that, it's not like one person who doesn't know the language well gets a crib and then does a translation the way Lowell or Pound did, but it's actually people who know the language pretty well. So I think you really get an insight into the tradition in very, very strong ways. Also, Maura McEntee once said to me that should literature cease to be written in the Irish language, could literature written in the English language remain particularly Irish? Of course, I think it could, but it would lose an important ingredient that really sets it, even written in English, sets it apart, I think, from literature written in America or in England or elsewhere in the English-speaking world. So I wanted to make sure that that was represented in the book as well. We had originally thought of calling the book What the Cat Dragged In. Let me get my glasses out so I can read well and not stumble over. But for that reason, it's nice because, of course, the book begins with Pangarban and ends with a poem at the end of another monk and its cat, which I'll read afterwards. I can't read it in the Irish. I apologize for that. I and White Ponger are each intent on his own craft. His mind is usually on hunting, while my mind plies its own special skill. Excuse me. I love working preferable to all fame on my dear book, eager to understand it. White Ponger does not envy me. He has his own developing craft. Once we are a story that does not end in our own dwelling, just the two of us, we find always something to which to apply our keen intellect, usually sooner or later, and after his heroic struggle, a mouse ends up trapped by Ponger. Meanwhile, there falls into my own trap a difficult concept, which I rigorously analyze. He aims along the wall, his eye, the perfect instrument. I myself on that which is hard to know. My clear eye, slow and methodical though it may be, swiftly moving, he rejoices when a mouse is caught on his sharp claw. When I solve an important, challenging problem, it is my turn to rejoice. Whenever we are so, neither interfering with the other, his own craft satisfies each of us, and we celebrate, each in his own way. He becomes his own Lord, who becomes an expert at his work, to illuminate the obscure. In what I work on, I am indeed competent. And I'll close with that. Another Monk and His Cat by Alva Nagarvi. Thank you very much. I practiced that this morning, but it didn't stay in my mind. I apologize. The glory of God guides my quill, the grace of God, the white parchment, the praising of God, the colored word, the trickery of the devil, the leap of the cat, curse of the devil, the hands jinx, vengeance of the devil, cat's hair in the ink. Thank you very much.
Go on, get Jeff, Nish, and Chéad dinner. Shalat.
Gwrmagod Vrian agus Jeff Choma Kiana. Osor me bheith an so. Ní éicim se sibse, fecin sibse, mis se fecim se mascana fud na háite, solas a hís éigen an son. Tá sé gceistúin me héin agus óla cúpla dáin a lé mar a derm cúpla ceann an duine agus tá mórán dáanta sa leabharsa, leabhar nach mór míle leanach ar fad, idir an dá chat. Tambúrá dáanta le feiscin le lé going ann. Agus an chéad dáin le léthe mé ná bheasas go ní roing an géad lead an leabhar mar bhíosa gom gomach óla caiintear na dáanta nó aimseacha agus dúirte lem héin bhfuil fécha me na dáanta níos tuisce sa tréimhse. Agus an chéad dáin léthe mé ná dáin le Moriach Alabanach ó Dála, agus ní chuirigh seo puing úntais ghine go bhfuil go scrías uorscéal marall an bhar céanna tá tíocha éigen bliana ó hin ann go bhistom. Agus tá sé deacair istóliam in sa bhéarla an Gaeilge cheapach, láróid mé fé sin ar báil. Ní déir me mrán fé bhí Chalabanach ach go ddíireach gohfuil sé ghine na daoine simúla ar fad I le tríoch na Gaeilge. Mar fila gar miúil de bethe, duine a dhéon dúnmharú, rud ná raibh ceadathe fiú bhain ag an ómsan, duine chuig ar a hethe, nuair a chiméad, duine a bhí a dul ar na crosáidí go dtí an talamh nuafa, beidir go raibh sé san éigim ag únsaí damiette, gur tháinig sé ar neis go héiring, go raibh caidir bheith géal ó rithean na héireann chomá céanna. Agus bheitfá súil istóliam leis an dáin áling scrí sin nuair a fuair a bhean chéile bás, ceann sa dátas áile hagain in sa Gaeilge, nó dáin eile scrí sé ag gléach ar an sprid naamh, teachta nuas agus inspiráid a thuirta agus ní do chanáí ní chlachamí nó ní smuoíimiid ar sin in sa maníisina, or dom na maníisina in sa tíú híis déag. So this is a poem of the 13th century by Moriach Alabanach ó Dála, a very interesting character who committed murder, refused to pay his taxes, being chased around Ireland and Scotland, served as a poet in Scotland, went into crusades, was probably in the siege of Damiette and other things, came back and had a relationship, it appears, with Cathal Crovierig, Cathal Mór of the Wine-Red Hand, as James Clarence Mangan called him in that great poem of A Vision of Ireland in the 13th century. And he probably appears in this, because this poem is not one of the ones you might expect, but a poem where he is offering his hair to God as a present, because he is going to join a monastery, and one of the rules was you had to have your hair cut. So he's saying to God, here you are. It's going to fall out anyway, but I'm giving it to you first of all. So it's interesting. So I won't read it all because it's quite long, but this is the Irish first. And as I said, the English is difficult to capture the internal rhyme, internal assonance, cross, like it's, some of Bardic poets a bit like a crossword, but sin scéal eile. An ulsa rit a dhé ahar, Aske éadrum is sí cruig. Morgus a nacht me chéad chéire an folteit ar ninad uem. Ma a chéire is a chúdach, I grí éan an jóir bhuig, trú a liomsa an bocht na bhrúilig, an folt fúnsa a ghuiileh rit. Tiomna se rit a dhé a ahead, molt de barag dá bhar chas, cóid a dhé ahar a éama, do rachach sé a éanar as. Mulsa agus folt casma champáin, do chéh ghriminnig is an ghreich bhuig, an folt fiúnsa is an folt buie, is loch de liomsa a nive rit. Cera bliana don bhar ógus, orm gus a níthe nocht, buine díam an céadhhar comsa, díal na mrégan valsa an folt. And so the English, it's a very good translation, but it doesn't obviously capture entirely what's going on. This hair I offer you, God the Father. It is a trifling gift, yet difficult. Great till tonight have been my sins. I offer my hair in their requital. Good has been its combing and its caring in soft-grassed ere. I feel sorry for this fair hair in fragments offered, Creator, to you. I bequeath to you, God the Father, my hair that has been shorn from its curly head. It should be accepted, God the Father, for it would give of its own accord. My hair and the curly hair of my comrade, I offer to you wavy hair and kindly face. This fair hair and blonde hair, their darkness to you, I deem a fault. For 4 years till this night, this fresh crop of hair been on me. I will now reap its first bending crop. The hair is reparation for my deceitful, false quatrains. And the reference to his companion is probably to Cathal Crovierig, king of Connacht, who apparently, according to tradition, was in the monastery with him at the same time. On Tarnadán lehime tagan sé ón seachtú hís déag le darliomsa Béidir an fille is fearr sa Gaeilge dar bhair riamh, tá go sé deacair éad den taisan rá. Ach sílam se gur chiimsigh Dábhí ó Bróidir gachra do bhain leis an bhile Gaeilge an rud persanta an rud do bhain leis an deanga héin le severúna tangan agus go bhain sé le scéal na héireann le scéal a anam a féin cuasaí cráifiachta, cuasaí ferige agus ba léir gur duine fíor neacha tíanta bhí ann. Agus tá dáint eile sa leabhar sa a chuam Dábhí ó Bróidir chumá scrí sé dáint a mór a fada a bhain le scéal na héireann agus an clí gur briseag éiring. Agus de besin an a chuam an frásúsáitar tún bhrise an tena gnáthebh sin the breaking of the old order. Agus úsáitar é sin go minic mar ná a bhaine leis an 7 híis agus leis an 8 híis déag. Ach an dámsa buine sé le lágar dúltaíag deoch do. Mar is óldúing filí bín tartara, go minic, agus dábhrí sin chuitisteach sa títárna seo saolín nó dúdnéig áitéigen an móthir idir corcaig agus liminach mar bhí sé idir an dá áit agus dúltaig an cailín freistal leanna thuirtá agus dhéanse í a bhlachtú agus ascaniú in san dán áling seo. This is a poem by Dábhí ó Bróidir, one of the greatest poets in the Irish language, I think, because he kind of does everything between personal poems, political poems, public poems, religious poems, and he also is somebody, one of the last poets of his time, who used to invent words. He invented his own language. You would recognise a poem by a Bróidir almost before anybody else. And in this case, it is not one of those big poems. It's a small poem where he is refused being a thirsty poet. Not only being a thirsty poet, he thought he was somebody who was entitled to a free drink. He was cadging drink inside in a bar, and the serving girl refused him. And so he did what poets often do. He cursed her from a height, and it's a really vicious curse. Poets believed that if you curse somebody, welts and warts would come out in your face. You could even kill somebody with a poem, and poetry would, a curse would actually bring the results you wanted. A friend of mine, a poet, I got him to curse the Tipperary hurling team before the Munster final, and it didn't quite work, so I'm not sure how true this is, and we don't know what happened to this girl. The interesting thing about this poem is that it has been translated many times, and I'm just going to no, I won't come to translation yet. I'll read the original first on Filíochta Sherike Íogar Srónach Seask. Filíochta Sherike Íogar Srónach Seask. Detig sin is eberiete im scornen fecht. Berach siefre detilí gan lón tar lear an delevín gan deriglí nar oid ma hart. Da rekkingi se velliginiev da joch kecht. Is bertantí go legadíist im scórsa cask, ó cheisnamh sí go bherig lín is beor in a gar, don shelligí nar legaí rí na glóire I bhad. Merigínach verigí gan ceol na cab, de helig sin le gredamín san bór semach, cé chelim riamh a pedigree mar ógras racht, bevjogandí da merchí do hósta cat. Religín an elitín nach dord na man, is seske gnaí da vekimidi a ród ra ma. A bheith na dlí os devindi go dio na drav, so letin síos go legacy mar neoid a cock. So, not nice sentiments, you would say. I'm sure if this poem was written today, it would be banned, which is great. The translation, now, there have been many translations of this poem, and I'm coming to the one that one of the editors, Samuel Fisher, who's hiding somewhere in the wings here, or maybe over there, it did this translation, which I think is remarkable because it does capture the original. But before I read that one, I'm going to read one by James Stephens, who wrote it. It was well anthologized, A Glass of Beer. And you will see in a minute the difference between James Stephens's reasonably mild curse. It's kind of quirky compared with the original, which is fairly savage. And his is called A Glass of Beer. The lanky hank of a she in the inn over there nearly killed me for asking the loan of a glass of beer. Made a devil grip the whey-faced slut by the hair and beat bad manners out of her skin for a year. That parboiled imp with the hardest jaw you will ever see on virtue's path and a voice that would have rasped the dead came roaring and raging the minute she looked at me and threw me out of the house on the back of my head. If I asked her master, he'd give me a cask a day, but she with a beer at hand, not a gill would arrange. May she marry a ghost and bear him a kitten, and may the High King of Glory permit her to get the mange. There's only 3 verses that James Stephens does, but Sam Fisher does the whole 4 verses. A shriveled up, skivvy, snarling, sterile and sharp, turned me down for a drink, though my thirst was parched. May a spirit carry her far over the sea to starve. The ugly little limp, has she not any heart? If I got my payback, I'd take her to task. I'd call for the managers and they'll give me a cask. She gave me a tongue lashing as she stood by the beer. I hope God gives her the mange this and every year. She's a used up old bitch without a note in her throat. She threw me out of the place, the angry old goat. Since I follow the law, I won't tell you her pedigree, but no loss if a ghost knocked her up with a pussy. She's a club-footed arse. I'm not sure that she's female. I know I haven't seen uglier out on the trail. She'll be a dunce until Judgment Day, never a wit. She may as well season her gruel with a helping of shit. People often thought that Irish poetry was quite puritanical, and these poems were often banned, but tá Gaeilge lán do ghanta den taisa mise áráileat. David sin sinad dáán a gomsa go fóil agus scuile mé for alle cúpla dáin eile i lédíh.
Well, hi Gachéine, the Cédul síos gur míle mágat as a bheith seo nniu, is ionach a bheith ar bhar máscan seo agus gur míle le Court Festival chomh maith. So, mar bhí Alan arán sin tá mise chun dáanta léamh amachtatá níor aimseartha, mar tuisgur mise is gweil gur mé atá tar éis cinál teanga ealaim agus ar Gaelscoil, so sílam se tá mé nán Beidir cinál relate Beidir níos mó leis na dáanta Beidir tá nua aimseartha agus mar sin. Agus, is duine mé atá Tá ansim agam sa Filíochta agus tá na Filí seo tá siad polisiúil ar chlí agus cosúla Seán Riordan, Mór Machantí agus Dúirní Gríofa chomá agus tá mise chun Beidir modrán na léamh ag an déir an sin chomá agus gur míle mágat a bhríon arís as 8 modán a chuir sa leir chomá. So, yeah, tá mise chun an dáil seo le Seán Riordan na léamh ag an tús an seo agus seo sibile. Agus bhí tuilis Seán agus éis le déaga bhí ailse agus tá sé den chuirsíos sin sa dáin seo agus tá rithim jazz leis agus tá sé an onrach mar fila chomá agus an dála a hasamach domsa dachuid na filarís agus sin dáin a leirm faoi go minic na meán chórtha maidir le ó haibhann passion na thug sé dom ó haibhann Gaeilge de, so le mé amach an seo. Bhí banaltre in Óthairlinn I linne an tróna, I chuisleanna I lapachibh ag prabarnig go túiste. De cheas sí ó gach leaba agus dáil sí seall I córamh. Is de bhreac sí síos an bhadaireacht bhí an sibile ina meoramh. Is de hilib sí go rithimach fé dhearra as an seomra is dag ina mhí mar caisealdó. Na chuisleanna ag córamh an sin de lea an tangelas ina hibal chre bheolamh ach do cheannig ag amenamh. Mar chungarach sa trómra de leanach leis an gahartucht I madisteir de fheola na chuisleanna mar manachibh ag sibile na nónta. So lay me in piece of Berlinish. As a nurse on her round one bright afternoon, her patient's pulses throbbing like metronomes. She stood a while counting over each bed, noting down the meter that syllabled between her fingers. Before syllabling out the door most rhythmically, leaving a chorus of pulses counting behind. Then the Angelus sounded syllable, shaking each lip, amens fading to a whisper round the room. And on the chanting went, in the monastery of flesh, the pulses like monks, syllabing their knowns. So it's bralam and línishin the amens fading to a whisper, to rudachint kidal durcha fi, agus sílim mar illa tá seán riad an réiliach, fi cad tá sé rá, agus tá sé rá agus is cum leis cad ceapan daoine fi, cosúla an dan filarís chum má, beidir tá daoine muid sin capach, beidir tá an dan sin kidal. Is gur aslinn tá ann, ach is bralam san slí go sé cho, tá sé cur ascuid smínte amachchan sin agus tá sé géir sin a léir, cumá. So le mé dan eile an seo ó mór amachchantí. So fiúch mis an dan seo mar is feminach mé agus sílim sa dan seo tá odd earón ann. There's a lot of irony agus tá sé sin láidir sa dan agus deadú tagart an suki ag an am agus an slí go bhfuil tá ró fi le mná ag cad ceapan daoine fi na mná agus cad gur cordmh a bheith ghéanamh. So tá sé an simú mar dan agus is bralam chuid filíocht mór amachchantí. So le mé cead seo amach cad is ban. Grána an rud í an bhean, hiile chasta, díreach seach léin the adar, breig na nabar. Níl inti ceart ná nóra, níl inti glynne, an gin an gléimh tá matcha mar is buinen. Batha í inach an duine, slán ní scarfer, go gilí agat gach charman, go bhaithí jalamh. Clachta an túmara a sampla, go marin eolaí, mise glachsam a padier, ampla a fálam. Má tá si gan céim chumis ach I mun milte, niv lehi gan fúntais, darv fravig sa tíirse. So it's bralam an dan sin agus tá sé an simul mar dá agus sílim a rís gur cur mór cinál tús le téimi file a leirtamach fi téimi file I dantain a Gaeilge agus is an ili. So sin é weimse nis.
Anna bhála go míle maithagad ar fad. Táim se chun dáin le ónrua súlaháin. Cíoríoch, bheas go gaithín cíoríoch a chur seach san bhríon an so. A chunáin do bhain ónrua súlaháin le héring agus ar fad mar Spailpín de bethe, chuid sé taisteiltí na tíre, marnéalach de bethe, rógad de bethe, réice de bethe, fille de bethe, rud a bunan go minic an dá rud, agus fiúmhain mar a bunan is muíoch alabana chodála a dhéon dún bharú, sé an scéalatán ar gur maríoch ónú súilmhain I dictárna de bhar trodanú ainish de hais éigen. Ónú súilmhain una de I think another great Irish poet of the 18th century. And he wrote a lot of these ashlingi, na dante in a dagach spearvan chige a ginche dom marialer cadvile torlu in Earing. The vision poem was when the poet usually walked out early in the morning and he met a spare van, a woman from the sky or a young woman as it would be. I had a poet friend of mine who, because he read this poetry, used to go out early in the morning in the woods, but he never met a spare van, so that's the thing that happens as well. But the idea was a poem of hope. And these poems of hope, they started in the 17th century right through to, in fact, went into the 19th century. And often the Stuarts dynasty, the rotten Stuarts, well, they were all rotten anyway, Bonnie, Prince Charlie and others, they were hoping that would come. And the interesting thing is in this poem, Filíochta, even though the Stuart cause was dead, the Pope didn't recognise him anymore, still the only way the Irish had of influencing it was by, of their only sense of expressing politics was by using the trope of the Stuarts, foreign power, to come along, the French or the Spanish, who always landed in the wrong places, it happened, but Shinskilla and Fad. On Dansa, aus Galiorla, Honor Sulvain, is Oraniad. These are songs. So therefore, they should be sung. And therefore, I'm going to try. I may not be the best person in the mission taste Farley ni an of putting with trilas, mar Sinead Fa, gur Lianchi the Raig o Gachéle. So, Chodrichte so Gaeilge douche. If I can hit the high notes. Chodrichte e gaimi he da hjol me. Tri her hef Marrow in veder stray. Gan prif chare diagre shom hongar. Is me griach tar meolus again. Da hinas gafir he shak dorach. Gael chloer chnover liam hen. Gwyach dent chan vrigel na gloire. Is gan nierbe a trokre in bial. Vi lien rahem chrische gan gorbe, sa chilsho gan glordinne gher, gan sevra sach bin go no smolach, shir chanten kjoil gach geig. Lem hiv gar hig shivreng al vovrach, vische virchre marnael, Nuglevi an ligele rosev, a quiescar sneer of old de kegel. Is doorbacht, mach riche, is bronach, ram hoichrem meg hornig gachlei, fagloos macht eg boerev gan soches, is ma frunse gar scholag again. Tom huilse le hard vak no gloire, gadorig maljogan for him. In a hoon falte duchische goidva, ruska no groen fok le foer. O stiever da diechwing par seile, ga krien is feile firem, le fleet daar hevlischig is beinig, is vier le korba is gemeng. Irach meer maar grilo voor kafrach, sheer harte koch, de nakpeler, is niet goeie hinkje meeting in the Asian. Gan Lee, has of garde, lemray. You'll notice I didn't sing every verse, which is just as well.
It's more rather hit the marker and start shot in Macnamlianta.
Well, no, the translation, which is not going to be sung. It's just about.
I understood one word.
And that means a goat, actually, along the way. But I thought I would get it in most others along the way. This translation is by Thomas Kinsler from Undoing It, which himself and Sean O'Toole put together. And I'm not crazy about all of his translations because I think they kind of fall between being literal and being poetic. But actually I think this one works quite well. And Onur Sulan used a very rich form of language with words cascading like waterfalls coming down. And it doesn't quite do that, but you do get the sense of this hope that the people come. So just read a few verses of it anyway. Through the deep night a magic misled me, like a simpleton roaming the land. The friends of my bosom beside me, an outcast in places unknown. I stretch out dejected and tearful in a nut-sheltered wood all alone, and prayed to the bright King of Glory with mercy alone on my lips. My heart, I declare, full of turmoil, in that wood with no human sound nigh. The thrush's sweet voice, the sole pleasure, ever singing its tunes on each bough. Then a noble she-girl sat beside me, like a saint in her figure and form. In her countenance roses contended with white, and I know not which lost. Furrowed thick Yellow, twisting and golden was the lady's hair down to her shoes, her brows without flaw and like amber, her luring eye, death to the brave. Sweet, lovely, delicious, pure music, the harp notes of the she from her lips, breast rounded, smooth, chalk white, most proper, never marred by another, I swear. Gloomy my state, sad and mournful, by horned tyrants daily devoured, and heavily oppressed by grim blackguards when my prince is set sailing abroad. I look to the great Son of Glory to send my lion back to his sway, in his strong native towns in good order, to flay the swart goats with his blades. If our Stuart returned o'er the ocean to the lands of Gaeilge in full course, with a fleet of Louis' men and the Spaniards, by dint of joy truly I'd be on a prancing pure steed of white metal, ever sluicing them out with much shot, after which I'd not injure my spirit, standing guard for the rest of my life. Well, am I going to like John
Tá.
Better just Tommy Gaelic.
Yeah,
Yeah, just on a hop.
Tá.
Just Don on a hopping. Reached hosting Bale Maria Halban Chodala. As in dansa, Don to tell us sorry slán leis an ihe réir. Don all in your fad a reach the harter than Leon shake here diag. So it's more than 400 years old. Agus an te skrive Neil Moore mach wirich. Is leer nor goit Maria Halbanach go Halban, mar a vier. Agus vonnig sé is toch teilig Filíochta a waar fag negeert te blien. Maria Halbanach, when he went to Scotland, became exiled in Scotland, and his ancestors remained poets in Scotland down to the beginning of the 19th century. So Neil Moore mach wirich is probably a great grandson or grand-nephew of Maria Halbanach. And this is a beautiful poem, Sorry Slán don Ihe Réir. Dána bhuiine le leanáin a chaníhe le chéile, agus an son an ládar giún níl sé géirige mo chis a géan duine go ráidir le chéile, ach sé rud a dhéanann siad in dhéasan ná tá siad a féchant ar a chéile, agus is láidir an échant ná éire de hálagus tá línte áile an sinán mar a deirm ná lig an bhaidin isteach éirigus chuir amach an lá, ceapan gur línte áile. So seo dáin just léime chuide a réintlí. Sorry slán don ihe réir, fad a géir a dollar gúl, ná jautí mo chor a gré, is trúa nach í a nocht a tús. Atá díis sa tis a nocht, nach cellan ros go rún, gin go bhfuilid béal ar bhéal, is géir sill an súl. Is trúa an cuirach de ní an hial, sille siúlach na súl. Ní ferd an tost de ní an béal, scéal de ní an rusk an rún. Noch a legid locht na miréag, smid har ma véal a rusk maul. Tig an ní a derma húil, ach táú san chúil úd haul. Cúma gain an í an ocht, trú gan ní mar seo go brach. Ná lig an bhaidin isteach, éirig is chuir amach an lá. Och a bhuire a bhuim an ting, os tup, os ceann, os ar géil, tarig agus gav ma láimh, sorry slán don ihe réir. Hail and farewell to last night, keenly at length it departs. Though I were sworn to be hanged, sad that tonight's not its start. There's a pair inside tonight whose secret the eye cannot hide. Though they are mouth on mouth, keen the glancing of the eye. See how the sense puts a fetter on the roving glances of the eyes. The mouth silence is no better. The eye tells their secret tale. The lying folk do not allow one peep from my mouth, O soft eye. Understand what my eye says, though you're in the corner over by. Let us keep this night tonight. Sad it's not forever thus. Do not let the morning in. Get up and put out the day. Ah, Mary, the slim one's nurse, since it's you who rule our sense, rescue me and take my hand. Hail and farewell to last night. Níl sanach dornán de gante as an jou.
Well, tá mis go bugar ailis chuig deirní gréfa agus is áí agus is bralam a chuid dáanta agus seo le tattoo of winch. So, yeah, is bralam an dáse mar tá se go hálinn mar dá agus win sé leis an féinúlacht identity agus go bhfuil rudací do gcónaí, rudací do tattoo gríomh winch bééis sé gcónaí an sin mar tá cuimhnúcháin agat agus tá sé just go hálinn mar dá. So, híl mé nach meach ann ach gur scrifiú, se slí chéine gur gurtha gasóir crink féin. Ag brathnú dó ar chópleir brach le botún a chláánú in aóir lena glántóir. Bhí dul mú nuair buineach de anamse do mo chracan, bhris an laser an tattoo ina mílte cahanini líocha. Thuig mo churp do ruach, squilche, inis is daine fós onum sílí de anam. Táid dáte im macella tam brach leat, tá tú le stig díam inis cáilte do echa. Mé féin is tú féin tá midne do jálathe. So tá sin just go hála mar gán agus tá an rithim a gceis leis chumá agus tá go leir líonn si go hála ann chumá. So lé mé as béle é chumá. So I thought they would simply delete you, as a child might find an error in homework. Frown, life, a pink eraser, and rub it out. I was wrong, everything's worse now. To take your name from my skin, lasers split into a million particles of pigment. My flesh bled, absorbing that broken ink, letting your name fall deeper still, sink. Sink, sunk, now you're stuck, in there wedged, somewhere in my innards, disarray between my arteries, my shame, my quivering veins, and I must live with your syllables smashed astray. Okay, if you're inside me now, lost, invisible, it's my fate, it's my fault. I'm sorry, it was me who made us indivisible. So, sin le tattoo vinch. Agus mata ama gwn beidir lei me cúpla versa do magan féin grug na man dov. Chuma. So tá diútachis a bhaineann le grug na man dov. Sweenim gomininic ar chéir de dóirt an túdóir Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, maidir le grug van, ar uachtar an bhéracha. Dá mar rud é gur cha Michelle Obama a grug is slí ná dórtha, níl seans dá laid go mbeadh Barack Obama sa teach bán. Mar saolig, conas go mbeadh America geal sásta bhóta chahabh de air go bhfuil ban dómh le afro aige. Sé sin chuna sa aibríonn an Cnéachas institúdathe a cara, táid bhí smacht go chvéil chúiseach. Fáilte go dain na mandómh, tá fearna buinteach le céir de dóirt an túdóir Adichie. Mar bhain dómh tá gá úlach a bhaineann leat, de inscinne is the gá de crackan. So I'll just read that part as Béarla Chuma. So there's a negativity around black women's hair. I often think about what the author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said about the wife of the former American president's hair. If Michelle Obama had worn her hair in a natural style, there's no chance Barack Obama would be in the White House. Because imagine, how could white America vote for a man whose black wife had an afro? That's how institutional racism works, my friend. We are subtly under control. Welcome to the black women's world. There's truth to what the author Adichie said. As a black woman, you are burdened with two things, your sex and the color of your skin. So, yeah, beidir just dead mé beagganí cursius ar sin ach yeah, bhí mis gurí dá mar sin a scríb sa bhilga mar ceap mé beidir go mbeadh cinál. There's a bit of a gap there beidir chun dá mar sin a scríb sa bhilga agus is bralam sa Beidir orinthe cahabhaisteach féinúlacht nó chinine rudí mar sileisteach a héhann teanga de chumá, so tá sé go hálainn é sin a bheits a leir chumá so gur míle mágaí. Agus, yeah, gur míle.
Sam chun Dawn a léamh doing? No, so tá mé chun deire a chur leis. Bhfuil ceisna ag éanú an lochtéisteachta? Má tá, Largaí amach. Ja, tá duine ag an so.
Question, that's what you said.
Agus cahan an ceol an canan lom mór. But if you're him will to scream in Gaeilge we cuasaí nar scream in Gaeilge we hana agus an wish sin Jacker no like she murder you back in a gap in the market like upper vision it just makes it similar.
Yeah, tá sé sin simú mar ceis mar in á réir níor swinig mis mar sin ag an túscur bhfuil gap sa market nó sa mar gan a payroad. Bhí mis just a gur mó chuid swin si chur amach an sin as Gaeilge agus just swinig mé agus just tá passion agam just bheitchaint fi rudí mar sin agus tá Gaeilge agam so céim fan ach meic méid scríb as Gaeilge fi na taimí sin agus just hála mé suas leis an dá sin agus bhí sé mar fort de srá máscara a bhí siúla ráú na Gaeltachta agus just ceap mé céim fánach meic mé ag leir fi na rudí seo Gaeilge. Agus cínte tá sé dachar a gnáam céile mar tá úlach ann ormsa chumá agus méid scríb na rudí sin as Gaeilge agus nach bhfuil na rudí seo ann hana ach I have to sell my truth as well. Caiimiise mo chuid éarna chur amach an sin chumá, so cínte tá daoine beidir an bhain sin atá ceappa tá sin difriúil inis sa tradiisiún Gaeilge ach mar dúirt méid tá mise cinál nua don tradiisiún agus tá mise tar éis teanga eilú mar scoil, so yeah.
An jarcha sin in Gaeilge because ní bhín an jarcha sin chu trasna ní bhín mór an duine leir cinnépas in áid duine le crackan thurga in Gaeilge agus sé sin sé hu sé bhaingar an mór éiste sin
gur riú agat.
A bháring, más máring tá an.
Ceist gom bhríon agus beidir Sam Fisher leis mátá sin. So is gníomh olmhór é seo a le héad seo de dhéalan olmhór chuirna chéile agus tá na cíanta istigán, tá dainach dam, tá ilginnéach dam. Agus tá fráma an comma fráma starúil is dócha I gcuidhhadas na nó beidir san omláin. Agus an cheistetá go marta bhríon ná. An raibh sé dechar nó dáanta a chuimsú stigan sa bhráma sin, agus is doch an cheist gáin lei sin ná. An raibh dáanta féile ágantar lár dá bhar san, agus go raibh anna airchasart mar jouler an stair a chur chun tosaigh mar fé mar dhéensih. Ach mar de dearm is mór gníomh seo péiscéile agus tóga sé tamil fada a ahint conas mar dhéensih seo, agus be mi de léomh linn go ceannaí bhd leis an mór rasca seo.
So tá cúpla freigra den cheist. Bheoh Sam níos an gáilte níos fearr a freigart chud den cheist sin. Ach nó, thugam tá go leor dáanta fáchar lár, ach bhí muína goin as na fothagarthirí ar fad a dhéon an ránú dus na ranóga faoi le. Cudacha bhí siad a tahantaring look an fedaling dán sa bhreis, cúig dán sa bhreis, de dán sa bhreis, ach tá an lár tá breis agus négéad leathnach ann hena féin agus caiith tú stop a rá in áit aigen. Has tí going tá mí bert lunathe haar lár. Hastig uing Filíochta na Gaeilge a chur fáil de phobal na hÉireann, phobal Mheiriceá, don té a bhí a bra reinbá ar aistriúcháin. Hastig uing star na hÉireann a insint ó húsama díon lá tá nóbhain. Ach ní trí na dáanta amháin ach le gach réimhrá agus gach nóta a héan le gach éon dáin, cótheachs a thuirt don léthór, a thuaireach nod, a thuaireach tróir, don Gaeilgeoir agus don bhéarlóir, chunas an dáin a léamh agus cá chóir dómh dul chuna hiile ólais a all. So, ní don bhfuil éine ann go bheith níos an rud an tomlan a dhéanamh, agus sin an fág bhfuil an irid sin scoláirí tucha le chéile goin ó átainna éagsúla chun an ráha a dhéanamh, mar tá gach éon duineacha ag gobar in a ghort nó ina réimse léon hain. An rud eile ná heasta going gombeach bert I gceannas ar gach ranóg, starí agus criticór, onas gombeach córá, idir an star agus an litríocht. So dáanta atá lárnach I tradiisiún na stara atá ann, ach ag an céanna dáanta a bhfuil sár iliocht le sunrú ontú. Agus bhí an córá sin an spéisiú ní rád ar réon ocail. I gcónaí agus bhí túrmaí éagsúla tachan cín. Ach déspóireacht tá ann, idir leistigh na leabhar féin agus idir na cabhad lí. So go bhfuilúsa chun an ceiste ragart, bhí sé thar a bheith dúchlanach, bhí sé thar a bheith deachar, ach scéal na hÉireann insint tríd an bhiliocht ó húsama go dtíon láta nóbhain. Níos an cábal Sam, but...
Would we get a growing amach a lot?
No. Tá mé tréig. Eisian an starí.
Sam.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to answer you in English just to make sure I get my technicalities right here. But I think he's exactly right that the way
That's
that we...
always a good start.
I learned quickly. He's exactly right that to kind of frame poetry in terms of the history and to frame the history in terms of the poetry, the key was kind of relying on the expertise of people who know what they're talking about. So I think actually empowering the editors was a really important part of what we wanted to do to make that happen, so that this kind of sophisticated grasp of historical context was coming from people who had that grasp rather than us kind of coming up with the scheme. So one of the things that was sort of interesting about what happened is that the shape of the chapters changed a little bit in the case of certain sections where editors were coming back to us and saying, this doesn't really work, right? It would be better to change up the chronology a little bit. And so I think that was really the secret, was to draw on this community of expertise that there is around the poetry and around the history, and to kind of put those two expertises, I don't know if that's real plural or not, but to put them in conversation with each other. And it's kind of part of the magic of how the book played out. I think that it worked so well. Sinead.
Did I understand from your introduction to the book, two poems, It Links to Scotland, was there a free sharing of, let's say, Gaelic literatures across the two islands at one point, and how, when did that come to an end, or how did it, who was transferring what, if you like?
Yeah, there was for quite a long time. And particularly, there were poets, and several Irish poets have the word Albanach, Scot, with them. And of course, we do know some Scottish poets were in Ireland as well. And particularly, obviously, in the north, but not exclusively in the north. And there's a poem here about the Battle of Innerlochy, which, of course, was fought in Scotland, but Ireland was aware of it. And people who fought in the battle also fought in Irish battle. So Scotland and Ireland was one continuum of a cultural area for many, many hundreds of years. I mean, Columkill, whom we were celebrating this it this year or last year? Was Irish and Scottish. The Book of Kells was probably written in the Ireland of Iona, even though the people of County Meath like to claim it for themselves, maybe truly or not. So yeah, it's best to look at it. I mean, obviously you look at people's names. So there was over and back, manuscripts were over and back. There are several songs, versions of them found in Scotland, found in Ireland. The great song Tom Emma Chullis Na Douche Dermaid. There's a song by Sheelas na Caplich, but from 100 years before that, which has the same words, similar sentiments about hanging the King of England and things like that as well. So yes, it was one. And what brought it to an end? Partly religion would have something to do with it, and the sort of divide between Ireland and Scotland, and of course the fact that the Scottish kings went to take over England and became kings of England. So and then the Irish supported the Stuart cause because we were always taught in school because they were Catholics, which is partly true or largely true. Also because they saw the Stuart kings of having a Gaelic descent. They invented a history for them that they came from the Gaelic background. So that's why Bonnie Prince Charlie was seen as part Irish. So that went on for hundreds of years. So that connection was, and of course in the Battle of Culloden, which we won't go on about, know something about, the most important part of Bonnie Prince Charlie's generals were Irish, because that's what they saw. He was supported by the Irish in Paris and in Rome. And that only came to an end, and they were still talking about the Stuarts coming back after the Stuarts were gone. So the connection was there. The reality was a bit different. We do have some poems in Scotland that are beginning to look to Ireland about the land war. And we have several poems with Moira Vaughan and Oran and others who simply say, we must look to Ireland because they're showing us what to go. So in one way it was never quite broken. But I think the fact that they became virulently Protestant reformers and we stayed the other way, I think that put a divide, and of course politics as well with the Act of Union in Scotland. So yeah, and I think the interesting thing is that connection is coming back. It's coming back closer and closer again, as if those long historical wounds are being salved.
Tá dá an bhrá sa láir ag John é héin faoi cuasaí COVID agus cuasaí taistil le linn COVID. So a question for Ola. Where do you see yourself in the tradition?
That's a hard question, yeah. Because to be honest, for a long time, I don't know if I even saw myself in the tradition, if you get what I mean. I just kind of see myself as an individual that speaks Irish, and that's it, really. But I suppose being a part of this book now, I can think about that. And yeah, I suppose tá mé new armchair mar scríbhneoir Gaeilge agus, Dini tá teach chun cín cóir an mar dúirtú tú féin, looking at Ireland now and, to mission mar fort an phobal sin agus ní lis go má tá an phobal sin nua in our area, you hear like kind of new Irish, new Ireland, tá muid taréis féin seo ar fáil tá mo fada inis, so yeah, ní lis agam, Beidir phobal tá teach chun cín, yeah.
Okay, chun clásúr a chur le himachtaí tá san chun a rábhar gáin a leo. The first time I met Sam he was working on the Irish Text Society version of O'Brúder with Deneen on one side and O'Donnell on the other, trying to translate this himself. He was in second year as an undergraduate at the time.
So it worked out great. Thanks, Brian. I'm just going to read a short O'Brúder poem because I think it's kind of a fitting conclusion. In some ways, it's an odd conclusion because it's a bit of a sad poem. It's towards the end of O'Brúder's life. It's kind of talking about his friends being gone and stuff like that. But I think it's actually a great poem for us to kind of conclude with, because I think what it's really a poem about, and what I wanted to bring out in translating it, is that it's a poem about the community in which poetry happens and how important that is to the meaning of it, right? Part of the sense of poetry is the audience, and it's really important to think about that. So as we have a kind of community of people interested in the poetry here, I thought it would be an interesting conclusion. So I'm going to do it as Gaeilge, and then I'll read the translation. Gaeilge fúlan illa drill nuas, do Cnámh gorcha and crinne mlíana mavuach, ní berle bris der bit do stil mastuam, ach megan trush do chora kiel in mahuan. Níl éfacham gumma tíocht manúr, dis na dringa díla gían do chuí. Moléan na nui na fear ar ire uam, nach déan na guf magwib da vliach of guish. I'll grant that I have to put up with a lot in this world. Its many flavors of woe have battered me about the head. But don't ever say it was shoddy language that silenced me. Oh no. It's the damn poverty that robbed my craft of meaning. There's no point in my composing anymore. Why would I? My friends have all gone on their travels. Ah, but if only they were still with me today. What could I be afraid to say then? So I think it's just a kind of affirmation again of the community that we're in is what empowers us to say something. And it's been a real delight for us to be here for a couple weeks, doing events for the book and kind of celebrating not only the poems that are in the book, or importantly the poems that are in the book, but the community around them and feeling like it's a book that's for people. And so I hope as you look through it, hopefully, right, you'll end up with a copy, but you'll enjoy it and you'll feel like it's for you.
Okay.
Gur míle maith.
Sin gur maithagah ar bhiste le búla bus a chuir go cantóirí ar fad. Agus focail buchas de Naomi a chuinnig sin ar fad fes smacht. Okay, gur maithagah.